A regime like Iran, hollowed out by internal decay and facing a solvency crisis, can't afford a symmetric, kinetic conflict. The math does not support it. Their threats are a signal, not of strength, but of desperation. The real launch-on-warning protocol is not aimed at a carrier group. The true vector is silence. The primary target is not a city, it is the global nervous system. CSIS and RUSI analysis indicates that actors who have crossed a certain brittleness threshold, whether it's a collapsing state or a non-state group, pivot from kinetic threats to systemic sabotage. Their final, leveraged asset is an attack on the infrastructure of information itself. This is asymmetric escalation as a survival protocol. When you cannot win a fair fight, you change the rules of the fight. The objective is not to destroy the opponent's assets, but to sever the opponent's connection to its own assets. Satellite blinding, GPS jamming, and the quiet liquidation of data transiting undersea cables. This strategy is designed to create a specific outcome: the blind Leviathan. A superpower retaining full kinetic capability, but stripped of its senses. It has the firepower to level a continent, but can no longer verify a threat, clear a financial transaction, or coordinate its own forces. This is the endpoint of systemic decay, a disoriented giant thrashing in the dark. It is a state of maximum, unpredictable risk. States do not launch wars when they are strong. They launch them when they are insolvent. Geopolitical conflict is not a flex of power. It is a solvency crisis externalized. The motive is not expansion, it is survival. An unpopular war is the final, leveraged asset on a bankrupt regime's balance sheet, used to convert a domestic liability into a foreign asset. CSIS analysis confirms this vector. For Russia, the kinetic event was a strategic response to terminal domestic decay. Decades of systemic underinvestment in everything but the security apparatus created a state so brittle it could not survive internal pressure. The war serves as a violent refinancing mechanism, a tool to rally a fractured populace and liquidate political rivals under the cover of national emergency. This weakness dictates the terms of engagement. A state staring down a solvency event cannot afford a conventional, symmetric conflict. The kinetic cost is too high. It has lost that option. Its only remaining protocol is a pivot to asymmetry. The objective shifts from winning a war to maximizing chaos at minimum cost, disrupting the stronger opponent's system at an affordable price point. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty. When a system crosses the brittleness threshold, asymmetric escalation becomes a launch-on-warning survival imperative. Look at Iran. Facing a nationwide uprising, the regime does not de-escalate. It threatens mass executions and all-out war. This is the textbook response of a weakened actor with no conventional moves left, converting internal revolt into external, systemic risk. This dynamic guarantees that localized decay will be exported. The LAFD, operating with the same number of firefighters as the 1960s despite 5 times the call load, illustrates the blueprint. Decades of underinvestment have created a brittle domestic institution. When it fails, the consequences will not be contained. A nation-state operating on the same principle of managed decay does not simply collapse. It detonates, converting its own insolvency into a kinetic event on the global stage. The kinetic cost curve has inverted. According to data from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, the cost of destroying a $5 million main battle tank is now as low as $500. This is not an incremental change. It is a fundamental break in the economic model of state power. We are witnessing the rapid, violent democratization of violence. The term does not imply freedom. It is a clinical diagnosis for the collapse in the barrier to entry for projecting lethal force. When the solvency of a state or institution decays past a certain threshold, it loses access to symmetric, capital-intensive responses. It cannot afford the tank. It is forced to adopt the drone. This is not a strategic choice. It is the final survival protocol for a bankrupt entity, converting its last sliver of political will into cheap, effective, and untraceable kinetic output. The math guarantees that localized decay will be exported as systemic, asymmetric volatility. The vector of systemic decay is not theoretical, it is operational. It is being staged and weaponized in what intelligence circles designate as gray zones. These are not the primary theaters of conflict, they are proxy laboratories. Reports from CSIS and RUSI have identified emerging regional instability in areas previously considered stable as key indicators. These zones are characterized by a critical deficit in systemic investment, creating a state of extreme brittleness. The LAFD solvency crisis, a direct result of decades of underinvestment, is a domestic gray zone. Their asymmetric response, bypassing the political apparatus to appeal directly to voters, is a protocol being tested. On the geopolitical level, Iran's regime, facing internal collapse, uses threats of all-out war as a launch-on-warning protocol. It is testing the kinetic cost of Western intervention. Even the 2026 EU-US Energy Pact suspension is a symptom. It transforms the North Atlantic from a stable trade route into a gray zone for economic leverage. These are not isolated crises. They are staging grounds where the tactics of collapse are being refined. The decay is the engine. The gray zone is the test track. The doctrine is known as launch on warning. It is a strategic protocol, not a decision. According to analysts at CSIS, it dictates that a nation must launch its nuclear arsenal upon receiving a credible warning of an inbound attack before that attack lands. This is not aggression. It is a pre-calculated response to an existential solvency crisis. The primary assumption is that the warning system itself, the radar, the satellites, is a solvent asset. This protocol contains a fatal liability. The fog of digital war describes a scenario where a sophisticated cyber attack does not destroy the arsenal, but blinds the warning system. The radar screens go dark. Satellite feeds are severed. In that moment, the commander loses access to the system's core asset, information. The entire command structure crosses a brittleness threshold. It is rendered insolvent. For the commander, conventional, symmetric responses are now off the table. Waiting for visual confirmation is a kinetic liability they cannot afford. The cost of being wrong is total annihilation. In this state of induced decay, the system has only one remaining survival protocol. Launch on warning is no longer a strategic option. It is the final, leveraged action available to an actor who has been made blind and bankrupt of information. The launch is triggered not from the certainty of an attack, but from the terror of induced uncertainty. A localized cyber event, a vector of systemic decay, is instantly converted into a global, kinetic event. This is not a choice. It is the mathematical consequence of operating a brittle system. Asymmetric escalation becomes the only logical and final protocol. The EU-US Energy Pact is not just a trade deal. It is a liability on the global balance sheet, a systemic node exhibiting extreme brittleness after years of geopolitical underinvestment. Parallel to this, we observe states like Iran entering a domestic solvency crisis, with official doctrine now openly threatening all-out war in response to external pressure. This is not a negotiating tactic. It is the final survival protocol of a bankrupt system. When a regime loses symmetric response capability, Its only remaining vector is asymmetric escalation against a leveraged target. The calibration forecast. Within 12 months, expect a non-kinetic, attribution impossible event targeting a primary European LNG regasification terminal, likely Bremerhaven or Rotterdam. The event will manifest as a cascading cyber-physical failure, creating a multi-week terminal blackout. This is not an act of war. It is a liquidity event, a kinetic cost imposed to test the West's response protocol to systemic shock.